the Baton Rouge Police Department and the city of Baton Rouge, and really the state of Louisiana, lost two public servants in a helicopter incident that took place on the early hours of Sunday morning. Earlier this week, a procession took the remains of these two men through our city, and right now we honor their service to the city of Baton Rouge and all of her citizens. We begin tonight's show with a conversation with Chief of Police Murphy Paul, who is here with us in studio, along with District Attorney for the 19th JDC, Hiller Moore. Gentlemen, when we scheduled this interview 3 weeks ago, we didn't know we would be beginning with a conversation about the loss of two more officers. So Chief, obviously I'll start with you. You're the commanding officer of the police department. Initial thoughts on this? I know that there is an investigation going on now. You can't get into the details of that, but just talk with us about the psyche of your men and women in the department after such a tragic situation.
Well, you know, Clay, it's the worst call you want to get as a chief. You know, the loss of one of your officers, and when you have a situation you don't have all the answers, and the family is looking for answers, that's tough. That's tough. We know that these investigations take time. We have been communicating with the family every time when an incident like this happens. We assign an officer to the family, so we have a liaison with both families, helping them get through this process. We're working right now with the family for a memorial service, which is going to be next Thursday.
Yeah,
it's going to be next Thursday at Estroma. So we're working on that. But it hits hard. It doesn't just affect the family and the loved ones and friends, all of our police officers, but the entire law enforcement community. We've been receiving prayers from all over the country, all over the state. But one of the things that stand out to me as a chief is the calls, the emails I get from citizens who have had contact with our officers and who've made a difference in their lives. So many pictures of presentations from schools, from the Leadership Institute, where our officers, our aviation unit actually did a presentation with our drone program. So they touch so many lives.
Right.
There's so much talent with these young men, and they're definitely gone too soon.
You know, Hiller, as district attorney here, longtime district attorney, you have served, unfortunately, through the death of a number of officers here in our city, both police officers and members of the sheriff's office, and it just never really does become something you get used to.
You and I have discussed this many times before. It just always seems that the best and the brightest are the ones that get picked.
Yeah.
And they get picked early, and these two gentlemen were surely like that. Our hearts go out to them. But you know, we need to look at the behavior that caused this to even start. I mean, why are you running from the police?
Right.
And I know there's a big discussion about police pursuits, what's right, what's not. But if you just start with just don't run.
Right.
You know, what's the reason to run? We don't put these officers in that position, and officers in a tough position with a chase. Do you really know what's going on? Why are you stopping them? What happened? Or is someone else in the car that's at danger? Have they just killed someone? Who knows? They're all different, but I think we have to look at how this started. And where's the blame?
What is your thought on what are your thoughts on the charges?
Well, we have charges here in Baton Rouge, which are more traffic-related than aggravated flight or aggravated obstruction. But across the river with Tony Clayton, we've discussed this. He believes that the aggravated flight or aggravated obstruction, being a enumerated crime, can lead to a manslaughter charge. So I'll be interested to see, and I think he is working that now. I know that the Baton Rouge Police Department is working with them now on radio transmissions and what it takes to support that charge, but it's something that we have to look at.
You know, I know, and I mentioned it before the chief made his comments, that the investigation is going on, and you know, in all my years of doing this, I never like to be in the middle of that, because it's important that the process plays itself out for all sides involved. But what can you offer the public in terms of any detail, anything you can say about this, or is there really nothing you can get into right now?
No, I think we know this all initiated from a pursuit. Hiller talked about the charges. We have met with the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, who's taken lead on this investigation. a lot of information that's coming in. I actually have a meeting with them today after I leave here. But I like to make sure that before we communicate anything to the public, that's communicated to the family first. That's something that's one of my pet peeves, that the family hear it from us first. So as it relates to details of that investigation, since we're not the lead, that has to come through that investigative body. But I can tell you this, it will be a very, very thorough investigation. I made some changes in the department when I learned that.
Well, hold your thought. I don't want to cut you off too far along in that thought. We're going to take a quick break and come back and continue with District Attorney Hiller Moore and Chief of Police Murphy Paul. Stay right there. So as we were going to commercial break, Chief Paul was talking about some changes that he had made, and I want to give him a chance to continue that thought.
Yeah, well, one of my biggest concerns when I learned, and my staff and I, and also the family, why did it take us so long to discover that an accident had occurred? So that's part of our investigation, part of our policies. That policy had been in place for years as it relates to aviation. We hadn't made any changes to that policy since I've been here. But one of the things I think that it's important that when our pilots are out there, that there is an air traffic controller in place when we're flying. So I suspended that piece at night. We're not going to be flying until this investigation is concluded, or until some policy recommendations can be made. Because I think it's important for our pilots to be monitored
and supported.
Absolutely, as well as the use of communications in our dispatchers. So those are some immediate changes that we wanted to make sure that we put in place to have more than one point of accountability. But we're going to wait till the findings come. That was half of our aviation unit that we lost, and it's really sad, but we're going to do everything to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again.
I want to transition to the case of Nathan Millard, who was here in Baton Rouge, and the discussion about it went on for a few weeks as we were waiting on the coroner to release his findings after the autopsy. And you held a press conference a few weeks ago, and you were here actually a couple weeks ago to clarify something that was said, that a comment was made by one of your detectives that there was no foul play. He intended to say that there was no foul play caught on camera.
That is correct.
And so, just so the public understands, the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Foundation replaced all of the cameras that existed in downtown Baton Rouge and added an additional camera. Those cameras played an essential role in you and your professionals' ability to track where this guy was when he was in downtown Baton Rouge. I'd like you to speak to that, and then I'd like our DA to kind of chime in on this story as well, so we can really get accurate information out.
Yeah, well, when we say downtown, that partnership with our business community and our foundation to help put cameras downtown was very important. Baton Rouge downtown is a safe place. We have so many events down there. And you're correct. It was, we were able to monitor his travel when he left a bar, all the way until the point when he was actually ended up at the Greyhound bus station.
Right.
That's probably a little under a mile. It's about 0.7 mile walk, and we were able to track him that entire time. We were able to see when he was alone, when he was walking with someone. And look, early on, stage in investigation, our detectives did some really good canvases and got some real critical information that led to the arrest of individuals. At the time, we could not share that information with the public because we had suspects that we were looking for. We were still building our case. I can tell you, it is frustrating as a chief and as detectives when there are leaks that get out there that we will never, ever, ever release because it interferes with our investigative efforts. specifically when it's details that only the people who were involved in the crime would know. And when you make that available, not only does it make it hard for us as detectives, it makes it hard for HILA as well to convict people. So when we have people intentionally leaking detailed information on crime scenes and stuff like that, it does interfere with our investigative efforts.
What do you think about, as the chief said, this process and being able to close this up?
So he can't toot his own horn because it wouldn't look right, but I'm gonna tell you that from the beginning, being on the ground floor of this investigation, like many others, when oftentimes Baton Rouge is placed in a bad light, police departments placed in a bad light, I know the men and women that are working these during the day, they're working their tails off, and you don't see it. And oftentimes we can't comment because of things the chief just indicated. It's frustrating to not be able to correct some stories. And I think this got out of hand from Atlanta first, some news that came out. And then we can't say what we think of what we know because we have children, you have a family, you have to be really careful. The coroner did a great job on the testing. We finally got that back. But this is stuff, they worked their tail off. And I think we also have to talk a little bit about fentanyl and what's going on now, and then the overdose that you see of this man. I think that we've seen a lot more in Baton Rouge and Louisiana Nation of people dumping bodies because of the fentanyl. They did something wrong, they're using drugs, they bought it, sold it, and then they panic and they discard a body. And that surely does hurt the ability to continue to investigate or potentially prosecute.
How much work? Well, we got about 30 seconds, so I won't get you started. But when we come back, I'd like to ask you how much worse that is now than it was last year. Where is it going? And then we'll talk about where we are in terms of public safety, both from your side as the DA, and then from the police chief's standpoint as well. And then we'll talk about this tragedy that took place in Nashville and its connection to both Louisiana and the city of Baton Rouge. Back with Chief Paul and DA Moore in just a moment. Enjoying our conversation tonight with District Attorney Hiller Moore and Police Chief Murphy Paul. As we were going into break, Hiller, you were talking about fentanyl and where this is right now, and they're offering Narcan now over the counter. That's going to be offered because the problem has gotten so out of hand. So where are we now in this fentanyl fight?
So I think that the news is pretty good right now. It's hard to tell because the backlog of testing, as you saw with the Millard case, it took a long time to get that testing, and that was rushed. So normally they're not rushed, but at this point compared to last year, we are 29% down of non-fatal overdoses.
Wow.
The fatals are around the same, maybe a tiny bit higher, but still we have 2 or 3 months lag to catch up. So it's kind of like non-fatal shootings. If those are down, hopefully your homicides are down, and we hope that that's going to be the case this year. But it's continuing to be extremely serious problem.
We had a 23% reduction in homicides last year.
That is correct, in the parish.
And in the parish. And the obvious question is, where will it trend this year and why?
Yeah, we look at some of the work, and look, and I have to say this, one of the biggest areas that we saw was domestic homicides. The DA's office led the Stop the Loss initiative that really focused on violent offenders involved in domestic violence. And I can tell you, those efforts, working with the sheriff's office, working with us, that was one of the areas we saw the biggest reductions was intimate partner domestic homicide. So I'd like to definitely acknowledge Hiller's leadership in his office in helping us get that. So even with that 23%, we saw some trends. Right now, we're at about a 48% reduction in homicides compared to this time last year.
Year to date.
Year to date.
Yeah.
About 13, 14 homicides in the city this year compared to, I believe, 25, 26 at this time last year. Those numbers are almost going back to the norm if you look at a 10-year span. So we're hoping that those numbers will continue. Based on the trends that we're seeing, because we're also seeing decreases in non-fatal incidents in the city as well. That's around 20% reduction in non-fatal incidents and about a 10% decrease in non-fatal injuries.
Okay.
So that trend has continued from last year, and we hope we can continue building on it. One of the things is looking at areas that's working, what areas we can improve. We talk about gang violence in the city. in our efforts to stop that. We've recognized that our Truce initiative can use some more support.
Well,
So,
that's perfect
yeah.
segue to that, because you referenced it in the first segment, Hiller. That's causes. Now, you talked about the root cause of this incident that led to the death of these officers, but I also want to talk about the root causes of crime with some of these young men who are laser-guided missiles looking for trouble. And as the chief always says, candidly, we have to invest in our kids, but specifically black boys.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, as you know from being at all of the truce meetings and things, this starts first at home. And then if it's not at home, then it goes to the school.
Right.
And if you're not at school, then we really get into some trouble. And I am seriously concerned about the truancy numbers that we have here that we're seeing, because you see in the news all the school fights and parents come that add to the fuel to the fire.
Yep.
But it's these young kids at school that are not going to school that the police have to deal with all day long because they're on the street. And that's why we see the increase in the summertime. We have to do a better job keeping our kids in school and educating them. Because as you know, when we get these kids that are killers or potential victims of killers that are maybe killers themselves, when you take them out of there and they see the light, these are some bright kids.
Oh, sure.
And but they're missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think we're losing generations because of that. And we need to find a way to fix it. The police, the mayor, the sheriff, the chief, they get blamed with all of the social ills, but it starts at home.
Starts at the house.
And I think we have to look at the schools and just not cast the blame on courts.
What about parents? You know, we had this fight at the alternative school about 3 weeks ago, and you had parents showing up, fighting each other, fighting kids. I mean, what can you do to really drop the hammer in a case like that? Because that doesn't help anything. And it certainly doesn't send the message to the kids that that behavior is unacceptable when mom is out there throwing punches right alongside you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a serious problem. If there's a case to be made there, you try to make it, but it does put kids and teachers and parents pitted against each other, which is very difficult to do. You'd like to try to rectify the situation, find out what's wrong, but oftentimes when we see kids in juvenile court and the judges there see them, when you see how the parents act in court, you know exactly why the kid's in the position he's in. So parents have a responsibility.
So we'll take a break. When we come back, we'll ask the chief and the DA about the biggest win so far this year and the biggest challenges so far this year. And then we will recognize a couple of ladies, one from Baton Rouge, the other from Leesville, who were teachers involved in this shooting that took place earlier this week in Nashville. And don't forget, the memorial service for those two officers will take place next Thursday at Estruma Baptist. I'm sure it'll be streamed back in just a moment. Earlier this week, there was another school shooting, this time in Nashville, Tennessee. A number of children and members of the school staff were injured or killed by the gunman. The two faces you see on the screen, Catherine Kuntz and Cynthia Peak, are both former citizens of the state of Louisiana and who were both killed in the incident that took place earlier this week. There has been an alarming trend in the number of school shootings in our country, and this is really a good time to talk about this with our police chief and our district attorney. And look, we're all parents. We all know the vulnerability a parent has when something like this happens. When you put your kid on a bus in the morning, your expectation is that he or she is going to come home in the same or better condition than they left. I don't understand what's going on and why now we are in a place where people are targeting babies, but I'm wondering what this is going to lead to. So first, your reaction to not just this shooting, but these shootings that have happened overall, and your thoughts about what we can do.
Well, you know, when we look at these cases, and I think it's two things. There's a lot of trauma that's going on in America, not just in the Baton Rouge community. And I think the availability of information and how we see it. We're talking about incidents that didn't happen here. In fact, this morning I woke up, I believe 9 servicemen died. There were 2 helicopter crashes, and woke up to that. So you think about all of that trauma that we receive. It doesn't matter where it happened, we're hearing it everywhere. Mental health is real. And you know, we have to focus on mental health. services, because I think that's going to be a common denominator that you're going to see in most of these shooting incidents, these school shooting incidents, that the person and or persons who are responsible at some point experience some type of mental health illness. So how can we, as a government, as a community, but as America, do a better job in identifying those individuals early on? And look, we have to have serious conversations about gun control. I support every person out there who has a right to carry a gun, but those people who are suffering from mental illnesses should not be carrying assault rifles, period. And they should not be able to buy in.
I don't even think there's a competent argument against what you just said. And if anybody tries to make that case, I feel sorry for you. I think you're absolutely right. Hiller?
Yeah, same thing. It's mental health is an issue. Just look at this last case. I believe that the parents, again, we go back to the parents at home. I think the parents knew the child was suffering. I think the parents knew the child had 3 weapons, but got rid of 2 and didn't maybe know about the 3rd. I think, again, it starts right there. I am worried about our schools, but also in addition to schools, the chief knows our hospitals and our emergency rooms are extremely potentially dangerous spots that we need to look at. We are trying to prepare things for hospitals, and I think we need to be prepared for schools just as well, but it's expensive.
I wanted to get to both challenges and wins, but let's just talk about wins because I want to end on something positive. Biggest win in Baton Rouge so far is?
The reduction in homicides.
Okay.
I think the reduction in homicides, but the great work that the men and women of the police department are doing. You know, we're working together smarter in how we're using our resources. I would say that, but we talk about every homicide. We never hear about the ones we prevented.
Right.
We didn't hear about the ones we prevented through Intruce when we did one of our intervention efforts. We don't hear about the ones that are being saved, that are being de-escalated through the Mayor's Safe, Hopeful, and Healthy initiative. So I would say the groundwork that's being done by community members and the great work of our police officers.
Biggest win?
Overwhelmingly, the reduction in murders.
Your annual report is available right now. I don't have enough time. You're not going to be able to say this in 10 seconds. Where can people get a copy of it if they want?
You can go to our website, BatonRougePolice.com, and you can pull it up.
All right. Thank you to the Chief and the DA for joining us, and we'll catch you next week on a Holy Week edition of The Clay Young Show.